Power Grid is a board game where you and your friends play rival electric companies competing to provide juice on the grid to every city in the country by burning fossil fuels, uranium, and trash. Hi, it's Ryan from Knights Around a Table. Let's find the fun. Fun. There's a lot of strategic blocking going on the map. If you're a fan of games like Ticket to Ride, this is going to look familiar to you. And if you enjoy the aspect of just being able to get enough resources ahead of your opponents to head them off at the pass so that it's very expensive or impossible for them to head up in your direction and you can completely corner a section of the map, then you're really going to enjoy that in Power Grid. Not fun. Let's get the elephant in the room out of the way first. I'm glad you found somebody to love, but this game is ugly. The colors on the board are nice, that's a good start. But on top of that, they layered this whole filmy grime. Like if I was replicating this in Photoshop, I would use a cloud or noise layer of black and just soot the whole thing up. That's gross. And then the whole illustration style is kind of like 1950s industrial, which nobody's ever bothered to hang up in an art gallery, and there's a reason why. And then, like being sort of like a 1950s era game about supplying electricity, you could have gone like, Mr. Atomic, and a really clean look where they're kind of trying to church up the dirtiness of the power industry. But no, instead the artist just went dirty with it. Like those pipes that are connecting the city, they're metal conduits with wires in them. And we know that they have wires in them because chunks of the pipe are missing and decaying. And it just brings to mind like burst oil pipelines and electric shock and environmental disaster. It's gross, it's gross. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be staring at this thing for 2 to 3 hours. Give me pretty pictures to look at. Fun. It's a malleable economy and you and your fellow players are the ones who are manipulating it. So it's not stagnant. You can actually, by choosing to buy more resources, starve the market to put your opponents in sort of a difficult situation. Not fun. It's not just the artwork that's gross. Even the resources are gross. Like you're not powering the city with magical fairy crystals. You're powering the city with garbage. Garbage and coal and oil and uranium. It's just gross. It's just, they're just dirty and gross. Like imagine being that designer, Freedom and Frieza, and deciding on which resources you're gonna put in your game. Now let's see, we got coal, oil, garbage. We're gonna have puke, got some soiled baby diapers, the salty tears of an adult facing workplace bullying. 2 days after his dog died, got that skin that forms on top of Jello, the skin that forms on top of gravy. I don't know if that's the same thing. I don't know if those are two different things. Puke, I say puke. Taxi cab floor mats, public restroom short and curlies, dill pickle chips. Who put that on there? Those aren't that bad. Sweaty warts. You make electricity out of that? Sweaty warts? Oh, look that up. The wet spot has stuff under your toenails. No, under other people's toenails. Skin-fold custard. And this gum. Okay, fine, the resources are gross thematically, but they even look gross. Black cylinders for oil, yellow octagonal prisms for trash, red ones for uranium, and brown cubes for coal. Coal, which every educated school child can tell you is brown? When we set up the game after so many years of not playing it, I noticed that there were 2 brown coal resources missing, and the quantities of the resource components in the game are pretty important. So I needed to find 2 brown cubes to replace them. Want to know which game I got those brown cubes from? Dungeon Pets, where they represent poo. Now, part of the resources themselves being ugly and not very interesting is because of how far back this game goes. And there is an updated version where the resources look a little bit nicer. But it's like, step up to the Revlon counter, Mr. Pig. One more thing I'll throw in there. It has paper money in it. And dyed-in-the-wool board gamers complain about board games that have paper money because if you play them enough, the money just gets tired and worn out and gritty very easily. If you played Power Grid often enough, your money would look a lot like the board does. Thankfully, my copy of the game is at no risk of such a peril. Fun. Auctioning. Auctioning is a mechanic I really enjoy in games. It's fun when you see somebody declare something up for bid, they're the first person to bid on it, and you bid not because you want it, but just because you want to be a jerk and drive their price up. But of course, like in all auction games, that can really come around and bite you, because you might end up holding the bag on something that you were trying to bid up to make it more expensive for somebody else, and you didn't even want that thing. There's also a nice mechanic in Power Grid where if you're the last person to bid on something and everybody else has already purchased a power plant or passed, you just get to take whatever you want from the top row at face value. If you're the last player in the auction, that's kind of more easy to do than if you're the first player. But if you're the first player, you can be sneaky and put things up for auction that you kind of don't really want, or that you know your fellow players really want. But again, that's risky. You could be left holding the bag. Not fun. The iconography is not very good at all. Like I mentioned, the oil in the game is black and the coal is brown, which already doesn't make sense. But the icon for the black oil is white, and the icon for the brown coal is black. Now what the game wants you to do is to look at the colored strip behind the icon, but come on, give me a break. This game runs in 3 different phases or 3 different big steps, big chunks of the game. And there are 2 different trigger points for moving on to that next step. The first one is if a player connects enough cities. So you got this little city tracker at the top corner of the game. Now the number of cities you have to connect in order to trigger stage 2 or step 2 differs depending on how many people you have playing the game. But there's no indication on the board of when that happens. I've seen other games handle it much more graciously, where despite it being different depending on the number of players, they have icons on the board at those stages to tell you it's like 3 little people, and that's the 3-player trigger for the next step of the game, etc. Now I mentioned Power Grid Recharge. They put in a couple of little black and white stick pieces where you can place them on that city tracker, and that indicates, when you cross the threshold. I don't have that version. I've got this version. And it doesn't tell you, and that's dumb. And then when you get to the end of a round, you're supposed to fill up the market with a certain number of resources of the 4 different types. And the number that you re-up with depends on the player count. But that information, which could have been stored in a little chart on the board easily for everybody to see and to constantly refer to, no, that information is written on a chart on the back page of the rulebook. And I really don't like a board game experience that has me constantly reaching for the rulebook. I'd rather have my head on the game and not nosing through the rules all the time. Again, I think maybe in the recharge version, there's either a card or there's something printed on the board that shows you that chart. But come on, that's like an obvious thing, isn't it? Maybe in hindsight, and since Power Grid came out, that becomes more of an obvious thing to put on the board for everybody to see. But I would have thought something like that would come up at least in playtesting. Fun. I worried that this game had a bit of a runaway leader problem. That's where you see the player who's in the lead, you see what points they've racked up and how far ahead they are than everybody else, and you think, man, there's no way I'm going to catch that player. I might as well not even try. And it turns out you're right in a game with a runaway leader problem. But in the game that we played in preparation for this video, my family and I, my youngest daughter Isabel was far and away the runaway leader, and I thought there was no catching up to her. She had more cities connected than anybody else. But this game does not come down to who has the most cities connected. It comes down to whoever crosses a threshold and can then supply all of their connected cities or the most connected cities with power. So what happened was that in the last round, all of us picked up all of the resources from the market that Isabel, as the first place player, needed. And she got to buy her resources last and came up short. My eldest daughter, Cassie, took the game. So I like games where it's not a foregone conclusion. You can see who's coming out ahead, so you kind of know who to pick on, but it's not a complete hopeless case. It could still be anyone's game. Not fun. It's a bad rulebook. It's very text dense. There are a few picture examples. It's hard to index. It's hard to jump back into the rule book and find the rule that you're looking for if you have questions during the game. And it's very poorly translated and copy edited. When connecting to a new city, the player chooses the cheapest connection, Berween, the new Andone of his own cities, and pays the total costs to the bank. The worst part of the rulebook, though, is in this chart near the back of the book that lists at different player counts all the steps of the game and the different quantities of things that you have to move around and cards that you have to flip over and things like that. And it mentions that at X number of players, you're supposed to remove Y number of cards from the Power Grid deck. And all the rest of the details are about steps of the game that you've read about in the rulebook. So you think, okay, what did I miss? At which step in the game are we supposed to remove cards from the Power Grid deck? And you flip back through the rulebook looking for that step, and it's not there. It's never mentioned. And the frustrating thing about this is when I first got the game, I got hung up on that and I searched everywhere and I had no idea what they were talking about. I had to go to BoardGameGeek to look up what was going on. And a good time at the game table is inversely proportional to the number of times you have to go to BoardGameGeek to look things up. And then when I played the game again, it's gotta be 10 years later, the same darn thing hung me up. Fun. You can play purple? Not fun. The phases are fussy. You've got this little card in front of you, which has been reduced to pictographs in the recharged version. It tells you lockstep which phases of the game you're following and who does what and why and when. But it's like step 2 goes in reverse player order, and then step 3 goes in reverse player order, and then step 4 goes in player order, and step 5 you do this. And you're supposed to do it in player order, but it doesn't mention it on the card, and it's really hard to internalize the whole thing, and I just found myself writing that guide for the entire game, like it didn't become second nature at any point while I was playing. Not even by the last round did I have it down pat. And then when you reach step 2, you're supposed to remove a certain number of cards, but it depends on the player. When you reach step 3, you're supposed to do something else. And at the beginning of the game, you're supposed to randomize the players and then play to step 2 and then jig the player order according to something that happened in that round, but that's the last time you do that for the rest of the game? Like, it's finicky, it's fussy. Poop on it, I don't need it. Fun. Not fun. This game is all math all the time. At the beginning of the game, you think, oh, that's not too bad. I just have to add 3 plus 8. I can do that. But then by the end of the game, all 4 of us had our calculators out. We're like, 87 plus 93. And, you know, it just gets into a huge addition fest. And if you're really good at math, you may be laughing at me right now and say, oh, that's not a big, come on, it's like primary grade arithmetic. What's the big deal? Well, here's the big deal. I have a family member who doesn't like playing board games because they're very reading heavy. Now, he's an adult male, he's past middle age, and he's just not a very strong reader. And he gets really uncomfortable in any situation that kind of draws attention to that fact, that he struggles with his literacy. If you're good at math, you might not know this, but there are adults, and I often include myself in this group, who feel the same way about numeracy. We're not comfortable with even what you would consider simple arithmetic, and especially not comfortable doing that arithmetic in front of other people under time pressure and feeling like we need to be able to add numbers together as fast as the other people at the table add numbers together. So if you play a lot of Monopoly, you know there's kind of 2 types of people who play Monopoly. There's the person who rolls the dice, adds up the 2 numbers, and then goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, counts it all out. And then there's the type of person who rolls the dice, goes, picks up the piece and goes, and just warps to the next spot on the board. If you're that type of person and you're very, very comfortable with numbers, this might not be a big deal to you. But I am a bit of a numerophobe. I don't like adding in front of other people, I don't like the time pressure, and I don't like looking like a big idiot when I make a mistake. And I think what is really, really interesting, is kind of telling, if you had an adult at the table who was struggling with reading, and just handed a card to you and said, like, I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around the words, I can't really read the text on that card, can you help me out with this? You would feel probably bad for that person. You'd feel that person's embarrassment, you would empathize, and you would say, sure, this is what the card says and this is what the card means. But we're not like that with numbers, are we? I think we're much quicker to mock people who can't add numbers together quickly in their heads than we are with people who struggle with reading. Even though it might be a very similar learning barrier that causes a person to be uncomfortable with numbers. You're much more likely to get mocked at the game table for making a math error than for screwing up something that you read. Power Grid opens you up to mockery of the worst kind, math mockery. Fun! The original title of the game in German is Funkenschlag. Not fun. What the heck is this thing supposed to be? I'm not European, I live in Canada, and we don't have those here. We don't really have electricity in Canada. But it wasn't until I looked at one of the other versions of Power Grid that I realized what this was, because they drew it with a plug stuck in it. This is a plug socket. And so what's weird to me is that you would localize the whole game. You would change the name from German Funkenschlag to English Power Grid, and you would have Germany on one side of the board and America on the other side of the board, presumably to appeal to American audiences. You get that weird 2-hole robot face on the back of the power plant cards. How hard would it be to just change that one picture to localize it for your North American audience? Come on, man, it's one picture. So let's find the fun in Power Grid, where fun is represented by being fully charged, and not fun is represented by being fully charged. Power Grid isn't fun. Oh, but Ryan, you say, clutching your pearls. Power Grid has enjoyed a privileged position in the BoardGameGeek Top 100 list for over a decade. And to that I reply, yeah, maybe it's time to revisit that. It's kind of like when movie critics laud this old movie and they say, oh my gosh, it was ahead of its time, it's amazing. And you sit down and watch it, and you say, yeah, I can see why that movie is impressive. For 1939, the cool thing about board games, and games in general, is that they're ever evolving, and we're finding new and better and more exciting ways to entertain each other. And I think that the year that Funkenschlag / Power Grid came out, yeah, it was probably worth that high rating. It was a very good game at the time. But when you compare it to other games that are coming out now, production values are better, the decision space is more interesting, there's a much better sense of immersion with a lot of games, which I know wasn't the point of this one, but that's really important to me. The artwork is better. There are just so many games that I can recommend over Power Grid. And if you're dedicating yourself to playing the greats, that's fine. If you've never played Power Grid, sure, sit down, have a game of Power Grid. But hopefully you find it at a board game cafe and you don't spend your hard-earned money on it. Now, of course, different things are fun to different people. My eldest daughter, Cassie, who I think is a little bit, accountant-y. You know what I mean? Like all the telltale signs are there. She's kind of giving clues that she might be an accountant, you know what I'm saying? She really had fun with this game. She liked it a lot. But she has the type of brain where she likes making numbers go up and down. She likes games about economy, and that was really enjoyable for her. She also liked setting up shop in the complete opposite end of the country where nobody can block her or get in her way. Could you have fun with Power Grid? Sure, of course. Lots of people have, lots of people will, lots of people do. Me? I'm just not one of those people. And you might not be either. So try before you buy. Or you may be in for a shock. Thanks for watching this one. Make sure you hit the like, subscribe, and bell button. If you want me to slag off your favorite game, be sure to support me on Patreon, patreon.com/knightsaroundatable. Catch you next time when we find the fun. I have the power.